it's time for, we do a weekly tip about team building and how we can be successful in doing that. I know that many of you are in different circumstances with ABA. Some of you have an ABA provider that is close by, that's helping you to design your program. You're having therapists show up at your door. Woohoo, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. You are more than likely having something called overlaps, which is really essential and important to having success in your team building. If you're not having overlaps, I would talk to your ABA provider about how often you should be having an overlap. I'll explain what an overlap is in a second. For some of you, though, you are not close enough to an ABA provider, so you're doing something like the card workshop model where you're having someone come to your area for a period of time, you're staffing your own team, having that person train your team, you're working with them periodically, but you're really staffing your team yourself. And then others of you are using skills and CARD learning, creating your own team from scratch, maybe with minimal help from a BCBA, but really trying to do this on your own. And I have respect for, no matter which way you're doing that, I totally respect you, because none of it's easy, right? It's all doable ultimately, but none of it's easy. And it takes a lot of forethought and planning. No matter which way you do it, you really have to be high level scheduler, planner, carry things out, right? Really hard when you've got everything else in the world to deal with. But we need to talk a little bit about overlapping and why it's important. When you are and this is, we had somebody talking, Ashley Colas was in talking about babysitting and how we can be successful at babysitting. And she was saying overlapping important there. Overlapping is when you have somebody who is there working with a child and somebody else in addition, so that you can be working on something that either takes two hands, or you can be helping to train somebody, watching somebody new who's working to give them pointers afterwards. Really important that we make time in the schedule and in the budget, whatever it is, for some overlaps. If you're the parent and you're running the team, it may be that you're saying that you're going to be doing the overlapping. So the person who's working with your child comes, and the first couple of times that they're working with a child, you're right there with them. In fact, you might be showing, they might be sitting there in the passive position. You're working on things with your child so that they get an opportunity to see you work with a child, and then you might tag team in and say, okay, you try it. Maybe not the first time, maybe the second time or the third time, but that there is always an opportunity for them to watch you or somebody who's a little bit more knowledgeable than them, and then you get the opportunity to watch them. It's a really effective way of, it's not the only way to train, right? I really recommend that you do CARD learning and have them, they can do that at home and show up and already be ahead of the game. But at some point, you got to take it to the actual in vivo, as they say, the actual circumstance. And because all children are different, you don't want to just turn somebody over to watch your child and throw them in the deep end of the pool, right? That's not good for them. It's not going to build the team in a way that the person is going to find it reinforcing and want to stick around. It's not going to be good for your child. People are going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. And the people on your team are going to make mistakes. But let's minimize them, right? We always know that mistakes are going to happen, and it's not the end of the world. But let's minimize them, because we want to be the most effective, the most efficient, right? And I always like to say, my child is not a guinea pig. You know, I sometimes make mistakes working on him, but I don't want to set him up in a circumstance where he's just a test tube thing and we're going to see, oh, you know, does this work? It's the reason why we wanted to do ABA, because we know that it's been scientifically shown to be effective. We're not wasting our time with something that we don't know whether it works or not. So giving your child that gift of having somebody who is as prepared as possible, really wonderful thing to do for your child, really wonderful thing to do for you so that you're not as nervous about it, but really, really ultimately the most helpful to the therapist, who is going to feel like, okay, I know what it is that I'm doing. So they're going to be more successful, and ultimately they're going to stay longer. Really interesting, and everybody does overlaps slightly differently, but because I've had many overlaps in my house over the years. Whenever there were new therapists who were training, they would have their training, and then they would come out and do overlaps. And the first couple of times they would just watch a more senior therapist working with my child, and eventually, slowly, depending on the person's abilities, they would let the new therapist do something, and they would talk to them about it and tweak it. Always constructive criticism. Nobody is being barked at, especially in front of the child. And in general, unless the child is in danger, we're not interrupting somebody in the middle and saying you're doing that wrong, because we want to make sure that we're building rapport between this new therapist and the child, and not setting up this new therapist to look like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, because our kids understand that, and they say, oh, somebody new, they're not doing it right, I can get away with more. And then the minute that the therapist, the senior therapist is gone, we will see behaviors creep in that we don't want. It makes it harder for our child, makes it harder for the new therapist. So not criticizing in the moment, unless something's happening that's really to the detriment of the child, in which case, of course, we're going to interrupt, right? But most of the time, making that a separate moment to the side afterwards. But build it into the schedule. And you'll learn over time how much time your child needs and how much time a new therapist needs, but make sure you schedule it in, and that it's not a last-minute thought. Everyone will be more successful. We know that in order for a behavior to be maintained over and over and over again, it has to be reinforcing. I think that the entire thing becomes more reinforcing when people feel prepared. So a great tip that a lot of our families have given us: make sure you plan for overlaps.